We laughed at the human's old jacket, until the master instructor saw it and forgot how to breathe. I am not going to pretend I was excited about sharing training space with a human. There, I said it. My name is Vec, and before you judge me too harshly, understand that everyone at the Galactic Combat Academy had heard the rumors. Humans were soft, fragile, from some backwater planet that only recently got clearance to join the wider community, and frankly most of us thought it was a charity case. The orientation hall buzzed with nervous energy that morning. 73 cadets from 42 different worlds, all crammed into a space that smelled like recycled air and ambition. I stood near the back with my chitinous plates still aching from the morning's calibration exercises, watching the crowd filter in. There were Corthans, of course, their 6 arms making them natural candidates for multi-weapon combat training. A cluster of Valine floated near the ceiling, their translucent bodies shimmering with bioluminescence, already forming the tight social bonds their species was famous for. I spotted 3 Draxan, their scaled hides marked with traditional warrior scars, looking as unimpressed as I felt. Even a couple of Quilix had made it through the preliminary trials, which was impressive considering their species barely reached my knee height. We were the best, the elite, the ones who had clawed, fought and bled our way through regional qualifications just to stand in this hall, and we were about to begin 6 cycles of the most brutal training regimen the galaxy had to offer. Then she walked in. I noticed the jacket first. How could I not? It was ancient by any standard, made from some kind of thick woven material in a mottled green and brown pattern. Primitive camouflage, I realized with a snort, the kind of thing you would need on a planet where your enemies could not see across multiple light spectrums. There were patches sewn onto the shoulders and chest, faded symbols that meant nothing to me. The whole thing looked like it had survived a war, or maybe 3. The human wearing it, Riley Kovacs, according to the registration list I had memorized, walked with her hands shoved into the jacket's pockets. She was tall for her species, I supposed, with dark hair pulled back in a simple tail. Her skin was that odd pale brown shade humans came in, and her eyes, those unsettling forward-facing predator eyes, swept across the room with casual disinterest. Is she serious right now? Thren, a Corthan standing next to me, gestured with 2 of his upper arms. Did she get lost on her way to a historical reenactment? Cora, a Valine who had drifted down to our level, pulsed with amused colors. Perhaps she thinks it is intimidating. How charming. How very, very charming. I watched Riley find a spot along the side wall, leaning against it like she had all the time in the world. A few other cadets were staring now, whispering behind hands and appendages. Jax, a Draxan with particularly prominent horns, actually laughed out loud, the sound echoing across the hall. Did her species not get the memo about standard academy attire? He called out, loud enough for half the room to hear. Or is that the best Earth has to offer? Riley's eyes flicked toward him for maybe half a second. Then she smiled. Not a friendly smile, mind you. The kind of smile that said she had heard every joke before and had stopped caring somewhere around the 1000th repetition. She shifted her weight, pulled one hand from her pocket long enough to adjust the jacket collar, and went back to studying the room like we were the curiosity and not her. The audacity actually made me bristle. Here we were, proven warriors from established military cultures, and this human from a planet that had barely figured out faster-than-light travel was standing there in her grandfather's hand-me-downs like she owned the place, like she belonged. I leaned toward Thren. This is going to be entertaining, I muttered. Give her 3 days before she washes out. 3 days? Thren clicked his mandibles in amusement. You are generous, Vec. I give her until the first live combat drill. Those soft little bones are going to snap like dried kelp. We were still laughing when the side doors burst open and Master Instructor Dravik entered the hall. And that is when everything changed. Before Dravik arrived, we had a solid 15 minutes of what I can only describe as the galaxy's worst fashion critique session, and Riley Kovacs was the unwilling star of the show. She did not react. That was the thing that started to irritate me, if I am being honest. Thren kept making gestures with his multiple arms, mimicking someone stumbling around blind, playing up the whole primitive camouflage angle. Cora drifted closer, her bioluminescent body flickering in patterns that in Valine communication essentially translated to long-form mockery about cultural backwardness. Even Jax, who normally saved his energy for actual combat, kept up a running commentary. I heard humans come from a Class 12 Deathworld, Jax announced to anyone within earshot, his scaled face twisted in theatrical concern. Maybe the jacket is medicinal, like a security blanket for traumatized younglings. They got laughs. Decent ones too. Riley just leaned against that wall, one boot crossed over the other, looking for all the world like she was waiting for a transport that was running late. Her eyes tracked across the room in a slow, methodical pattern. Not nervous scanning, not the wide-eyed panic of someone in over their head. No, this was assessment. Cold, patient, thorough assessment. It made my plates itch. See, here is what everyone knew about humans. They came from Earth, a planet with frankly absurd gravity, ridiculous temperature swings, and enough natural predators to make settlement a nightmare. Their bones were dense but brittle compared to proper species. Their muscle structure was inefficient. They had exactly 2 eyes, could only see a fraction of the useful spectrum, and their auditory range was embarrassingly narrow. No natural armor, no venom, no regeneration capabilities worth mentioning. They were by every measurable standard inadequate for military service. So why was the Academy letting them in? Charity. Had to be. Some diplomatic gesture to make the newcomers feel included in galactic society. Give them a participation medal. Let them wash out with dignity. Send them home with a nice certificate and a story about how they tried their best. I had convinced myself of this. Absolutely convinced myself. Do you think she realizes those patches are upside down? Cora's voice chimed with musical mockery as she floated past. Or is that part of the authentic historical experience? A few cadets nearby snickered. One of the Quillicks, a scrappy little female named Pip, actually scurried closer to get a better look at the jacket, her whiskers twitching with curiosity. It is not upside down, Pip squeaked, her translator struggling with her rapid speech pattern. Look at the stitching. That is deliberate placement. Old military standard, I think. Very old. Old is right, Thren cut in, waving a dismissive arm. Probably held together with prayers and good intentions at this point. I am amazed it survived the trip through decontamination. Through all of this, Riley had not moved, had not spoken. Her expression remained neutral, almost serene, with just the faintest hint of amusement tugging at the corner of her mouth, like she was watching a mildly entertaining show she had seen before, like we were performing for her benefit and she was graciously allowing it. That smile, that tiny knowing smile, it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Jax must have noticed it too, because he pushed off from his spot and actually walked toward her, all confident swagger and scaled bulk. He was easily twice her mass, and his species had been warrior bred for 17 generations. He stopped about 2 meters away, arms crossed, head tilted in exaggerated curiosity. "Tell me, human," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness, "is that jacket supposed to frighten us? Because I have to say, the only thing scary about it is the smell. When was the last time your people invented washing machines?" Riley's eyes shifted to him. Just her eyes. The rest of her body stayed perfectly relaxed against that wall. She looked at Jax for a long, quiet moment, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped 2 degrees. Then she spoke for the first time, her voice low and completely unbothered. 1797, she said simply. "We invented washing machines in 1797. But thanks for your concern about my hygiene, big guy. Real thoughtful of you." Jax blinked, clearly not expecting an actual answer, let alone one delivered with such casual dismissal. A few cadets laughed, though whether they were laughing with Riley or at Jax's confusion I could not tell. Before anyone could respond, the side doors exploded inward with a bang that made half the room flinch. Master Instructor Dravik had arrived, and he looked like he was ready to make us all regret being born. Dravik was not someone you forgot meeting, even if you desperately wanted to. He stood 3 meters tall, a hybrid result of genetic modifications from 4 different species, all of them predatory. His upper body carried the bulk of Draxan musculature, covered in scales that had seen more combat than most of us would in 10 lifetimes. His lower half moved on 6 insectoid legs that clicked against the floor with mechanical precision. 2 sets of arms, one pair massive and clawed, the other smaller and built for fine manipulation. His face was almost veilin in structure, translucent enough that you could see the bone underneath. But his eyes, those eyes were pure Corthan, multifaceted and capable of seeing everything at once. The entire hall went silent. Not the polite quiet of students paying attention, but the absolute breath-holding silence of prey animals realizing a predator had entered their space. "Form up." His voice was not loud, but it carried like a shockwave, resonating in frequencies that made my internal organs vibrate uncomfortably. "You have 10 seconds. We scrambled. 73 cadets moving as one panicked mass toward the center of the hall, forming the traditional academy lines with all the grace of a ship crash. I ended up in the 3rd row, Thren beside me, his multiple arms tucked in tight to avoid accidentally hitting someone. Cora floated directly behind us, her earlier amusement replaced by nervous flickering. Riley pushed off from the wall and walked, not ran, walked to take her place at the end of the second row, still wearing that jacket, still looking completely unimpressed. Dravik's eyes swept across us with the kind of attention that made you aware of every flaw in your posture, every weakness in your stance. His smaller arms clasped behind his back while the larger ones hung loose at his sides, claws flexing slowly. "I am Master Instructor Dravik," he began, his voice dropping into a lower register that somehow made it more terrifying. "For the next 6 cycles I own you. Your sleep, your pain, your victories, your failures, they all belong to me. Some of you will break. Some of you will quit. Some of you, if you are particularly stupid or unlucky, will die. The Galactic Combat Academy does not produce average soldiers. We produce weapons, living, thinking, lethal weapons. If you cannot meet that standard, there is a transport leaving in 40 minutes. I suggest you be on it." Standard speech. I had heard variations of it from a dozen different instructors during qualifications. The words were meant to intimidate, to separate the serious candidates from the tourists. I kept my breathing steady, my posture firm, my focus straight ahead. Dravik began walking down the first line, his legs moving with eerie fluidity. He stopped in front of a Korthan in the front row, leaned down until his face was centimeters away. "Weak stance," he hissed. "Fix it or leave." He moved on, stopped at Evaline, studied her for a long moment, then continued without comment. Down the line, occasionally stopping, occasionally speaking, always radiating that sense of absolute authority. Then he reached the second row, reached Riley, and stopped cold. I watched from my position as Dravik's entire body went rigid, his multifaceted eyes locked onto the jacket, specifically onto the patches on the shoulders. His larger arms, which had been relaxed, suddenly tensed, claws curling inward. His smaller hands moved from behind his back, reaching forward slightly, then stopping as if he had caught himself. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 15. When Dravik finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the authoritative boom, the intimidating growl. What replaced it was something I had never heard from an instructor before. Quiet, careful, almost reverent. "Where?" he said, each word measured and precise. "Did you get that jacket?" Riley met his gaze without flinching. "It belonged to my grandfather, sir." Dravik's breathing changed. I could see it in the way his chest plates expanded and contracted. His eyes never left the patches. "What unit?" The question came out barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the hall we all heard it perfectly. Riley's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted, straightened, became formal in a way that spoke of deep training, deeper tradition. "2nd Battalion, 5th Marine, sir. Earth Forces." He served during the Frontier Wars. Every single one of Dravik's eyes focused on her with laser intensity. His voice, when it came, sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away, somewhere dark and filled with memories. "Show me the unit patch. Left shoulder. Show me now." Riley did not hesitate. She turned slightly, presenting her left shoulder to Dravik, and the instructor leaned in close, his multiple eyes scanning the faded patch with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. The patch itself looked ancient, a circular design with what appeared to be a bird, wings spread, clutching something in its talons. The colors had faded to dull browns and grays, and the edges were frayed from what must have been decades of wear. Below the bird, numbers were stitched in block text, 2, 5, and some symbols I did not recognize. Dravik's larger right hand came up slowly, and for a moment I thought he was going to touch the patch, but his claws stopped centimeters away, hovering like he was afraid it might disintegrate under contact. "Hadrian Station," he said, and his voice carried a weight that made my spine straighten involuntarily. "Your grandfather was at Hadrian Station." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with the kind of certainty that came from first-hand knowledge. Riley nodded once, crisp and military. "Yes, sir. He was there for the full campaign. 14 months of continuous deployment." Around me, I felt the confusion rippling through the ranks. Thran's antennae were twitching rapidly, a sign of deep bewilderment. Cora had stopped flickering entirely, her body gone dim with uncertainty. Even Jax, who had been so confident with his mockery minutes earlier, looked like someone had just spoken a language he did not understand. I knew the name Hadrian Station, barely. It had come up in a Galactic history elective I took 3 cycles ago, mentioned in passing as one of the early conflicts during humanity's expansion period. A border dispute, I thought. Some mining facility. Nothing significant enough to warrant more than a paragraph in the textbooks. Apparently I was wrong. Dravik straightened to his full height, his eyes still locked on Riley. 14 months, he repeated slowly. 14 months of hell. They told your grandfather's unit it would be a 2-week peacekeeping operation, that the resistance would fold as soon as proper military force arrived. He paused, and something that might have been a bitter laugh escaped his throat. They held that station against 40,000 Vexar shock troops with less than 800 soldiers, no reinforcements, no resupply after month 3, no orbital support after month 7. The numbers hit me like physical blows. 800 against 40,000? That was not a battle, that was a massacre, or it should have been. Sir. Riley's voice remained steady, but I caught something in her eyes now. Pride maybe, or pain. He did not like talking about it much, but he kept the jacket. Said it was important to remember. Dravik's smaller hands moved to touch his own chest, right where his heart would be if his anatomy worked like most Ceases. I was there, he said, and the hall felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of it. I was a junior tactical officer with the relief force. We arrived on day 417, expecting to recover bodies and wreckage, expected to find nothing but corpses and Vexar flags. He turned slightly, addressing the entire assembly now, though his eyes kept drifting back to Riley's jacket like he could not help himself. We found your grandfather's unit still fighting, still holding the central command complex. They had lost 632 soldiers by that point. They were down to makeshift weapons, eating ration paste that had expired 8 months prior, treating wounds with sterilized dirt because they had run out of medical supplies. His voice grew harder, sharper, and they were winning. I heard someone behind me inhale sharply. Might have been Pip. Might have been me. The Vexar had orbital superiority. Dravik continued, his smaller hands gesturing now, painting the picture. They had armor, artillery, chemical weapons, every possible advantage. And these humans, these soft, fragile, supposedly weak humans from their backwater Deathworld, they held a station that military analysts said could not be defended for more than 72 hours. They held it for 14 months. He looked back at Riley, and I saw something in his expression I never thought I would see from Dravik. Respect. Not the kind you give a promising student or a competent soldier. The kind you reserve for someone who has walked through fire and came out the other side still standing. Your grandfather, he said quietly, was Sergeant Dominic Kovacs. 2nd Platoon, Charlie Company. He pulled me out of a collapsed tunnel on day 419. I was trapped under rubble for 6 hours. Vexar patrol passed 3 meters from my position. He came back alone at night under active bombardment and dug me out with his bare hands because the excavation equipment had been destroyed. Riley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He never mentioned that, sir. He never mentioned names, just said he did his job and came home. Dravik made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. I could not tell which. That sounds exactly like him. Exactly. He stepped back, his posture shifting back into instructor mode. But the edge was gone from his voice. He made it home then. Good. That man deserved to make it home. He passed 4 years ago, Riley said softly. Gave me the jacket before he went. Told me if I was serious about this path I should remember where I came from. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Jax looked like someone had hit him with a stun rod. Thran's arms had all gone still, hanging limply at his sides. Cora was pulsing colors I had never seen before. Confusion mixed with something that might have been shame. I felt it too, that sick, sinking realization that we had been laughing at something we did not understand, mocking something sacred. Dravik turned to face the rest of us, and when he spoke, his voice had that dangerous edge back, the one that made you want to be anywhere else. Let me make something very clear to all of you right now, he said, his eyes sweeping across every single cadet. You just spent 15 minutes mocking a uniform that has more combat history than your entire species combined. That jacket has seen battles that would break most of you before the first shot was fired. It represents a heritage of warriors who held impossible lines, who fought when every tactical analysis said they should surrender, who redefined what this galaxy considers possible. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. So if any of you, any single one of you, has something else funny to say about primitive Earth fashion or Deathworld or security blankets, say it now. Step forward and share your thoughts. I would love to hear them. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Dravik nodded slowly. That is what I thought. Dravik did not dismiss us. Instead, he did something I had never seen an instructor do during orientation. He sat down, just lowered himself onto his 6 legs until he was nearly at eye level with those of us in the front rows, his massive frame somehow making the gesture feel even more significant. You want to know why that jacket matters? His voice had lost the harsh edge, replaced by something that sounded almost like exhaustion. Then I will tell you exactly what I saw at Hadrian Station. And maybe some of you will understand why I do not tolerate disrespect toward human military traditions. Riley remained at attention, but Dravik gestured for her to relax. She shifted into a rest position, hands behind her back, and I noticed her fingers were gripping each other tightly, the only sign that this conversation was affecting her at all. Day 143 Dravik began and his eyes went distant, looking at something none of us could see. The Vexer had just deployed chemical agents into the station's ventilation system. Standard suppression tactic, should have killed everyone in the inhabited sections within 20 minutes. We monitored from orbit, waiting for the human distress signals, the surrender broadcasts, anything. We got nothing. Silence. His smaller hands moved in front of him, fingers tracing patterns in the air like he was drawing a map only he could see. 48 hours later we detected movement. Human soldiers wearing improvised gas masks made from filter units and storage containers still conducting patrols, still holding their positions. The chemical agent that was supposed to kill them in 20 minutes, they had adapted to it in 2 days. Not through technology, not through superior equipment, through sheer biological stubbornness. Thren made a small clicking sound of disbelief beside me. I did not blame him. That kind of adaptation was not possible. It went against every principle of toxicology and biology I had ever learned. Dravik heard it. His eyes snapped to Thren with predatory precision. You think I am exaggerating? You think I am telling stories to make a point? He leaned forward, and his voice dropped to something dangerous. I have the medical reports. I have the biological analysis. Human bodies started producing antibodies at a rate that our scientists still cannot fully explain. Their immune systems went into overdrive. Their metabolism shifted. Their very cellular structure adapted because the alternative was death. And humans, I learned very quickly, do not accept death as an option when there is still fighting to be done. He turned his attention back to the wider group, his voice rising again. Day 206. Vexar Armored Division breached the eastern wall. 17 heavy assault mechs, each one carrying enough firepower to level a city block. The human defenders in that section had 6 functional anti-armor weapons left. The tactical computers gave them a 0% chance of survival, recommended immediate retreat to secondary positions. A pause. Long enough that I started to wonder if he had forgotten what came next. Sergeant Kovacs and his platoon did not retreat. They rigged the eastern corridor with every explosive device they could manufacture from station supplies. Then they drew the mechs in deep, past the point of no return, and brought down 8 levels of reinforced structure on top of them, collapsed the entire eastern quarter, buried all 17 mechs and their crews under 10,000 tons of debris. Cora's voice chimed softly, almost fearfully. How many humans survived the collapse? Dravik's expression became something terrible to witness. 12 out of 43. Sergeant Kovacs was one of them. Pulled himself out of the rubble with a shattered leg, 3 broken ribs and a concussion that should have left him unconscious. He was back on active duty 6 hours later, walking on a splinted leg because they could not spare anyone for recovery time. I felt something cold settling in my stomach. This was not military heroics. This was not brave sacrifice. This was something else entirely. Something that made courage look like a starting point rather than a destination. Day 312. Dravik continued, and I realized he was not going to stop until he had painted the entire picture for us. Food supplies had been gone for weeks. The humans were eating things that would kill most species. Algae scraped from water recyclers, synthetic lubricants processed through makeshift filters. One of my analysts ran the numbers, calculated their caloric intake, and concluded they should all be dead from malnutrition. They were not. They were still fighting at full capacity. His larger arms gestured broadly. Do you know what a human body does when it runs out of food? It cannibalizes itself, burns fat, then muscle, then starts breaking down organ tissue. Any sane species would surrender before reaching that point. But these humans kept a combat rotation going, kept training exercises running, kept mission readiness at acceptable levels while their bodies were literally consuming themselves to stay alive. Jax, who had been so confident earlier, spoke up with a voice that sounded hollow. Why? Why not surrender? Why not accept honorable defeat? Dravik turned to look at him, and I saw something in the instructor's expression that made my blood run cold. It was not anger. It was not contempt. It was pity, because humans do not have a concept of honorable defeat, not when they decide something matters, not when they draw a line and say this far and no further. Surrender is a tactical option for most species, a logical conclusion when victory becomes impossible. For humans, for these humans, surrender was never on the table. It was not even a thought. They had decided Hadrian Station would not fall, and so it did not fall. Reality itself had to bend to accommodate their refusal to quit. He stood then, rising to his full height, and his voice filled the hall with undeniable authority. That jacket Riley wears represents every soldier who stood on that station, every human who looked at impossible odds and laughed, every warrior who redefined what we thought biological limits meant. The 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines earned a reputation that still makes veteran commanders reconsider their understanding of human capability. Dravik walked back to Riley, standing before her with something approaching ceremony. Your grandfather saved my life, Cadet Kovacs. He taught me that humans are not weak because they lack natural armor or regeneration or enhanced senses. They are terrifying because they do not need those things. They have something more dangerous. They have spite. They have stubbornness. They have an absolute fundamental refusal to accept that anything is impossible. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. Every single one of you will train alongside this human. You will learn from her. And if you are smart, very smart, you will learn what her people are capable of when pushed, because the galaxy is not a safe place. And the enemies we face do not care about your species' advantages. They care about your will to fight, your refusal to break. And on that measure I have seen humans outlast species that should have crushed them. Riley's expression remained neutral, but I saw her hand move slightly, touching the edge of her grandfather's jacket with something like reverence. I looked at that jacket with new eyes, the faded patches, the worn fabric, the scars of service, and I realized I had been staring at a battle standard, a flag that had never fallen. Dravik stepped back from Riley, his posture shifting into something more clinical, more instructional. The moment of reflection had passed. Now we were back to business, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by uncertainty and, if I am being honest, fear. Cadet Kovacs, Dravik said, his voice returning to that resonant instructor tone. I think a practical demonstration is warranted. The rest of you need to understand what you are dealing with. Center of the hall, if you please. Riley moved immediately, walking to the open space in the middle of the orientation hall with that same unhurried confidence. She shrugged off the jacket as she went, folding it with precise, practiced movements before setting it carefully on the floor at the edge of the space. Underneath she wore a simple black training shirt that revealed arms lined with lean muscle. Standard combat assessment, Dravik announced to the assembly. Unarmed. I want to see reaction time, strike efficiency, and defensive posture. Cadet Thren, you will be her opponent. Thren's antennae shot straight up in surprise. Sir, you heard me. Center hall. Now. I watched Thren move forward, his 6 arms flexing nervously. He outweighed Riley by at least 60 kilos, had 4 more limbs to work with, and came from a species that had been practicing multi-limb combat techniques for 7 generations. This should have been embarrassingly one-sided. Should have been. They faced each other across 3 meters of open floor. Riley's stance was loose, almost casual, weight balanced on the balls of her feet. Her hands hung at her sides, not even raised into a guard position. She looked like someone waiting for a transport, not someone about to engage in combat. Thren, to his credit, took a proper defensive posture, 4 arms up, 2 back, legs spread for stability. He had at least 40 centimeters of reach advantage. Every tactical consideration favored him. Begin, Dravik said simply. Thren moved first, which was smart. He came in with 2 probing jabs from his upper arms, testing Riley's reaction time, keeping his lower arms ready to grapple if she closed distance. Standard Korthan opening. Safe, controlled, professional. Riley was not there. I mean that literally. One moment she was standing in front of Thren, the next she had shifted 45 degrees to his left inside his guard, and her elbow was pressed against his primary nerve cluster with enough precision that Thren's entire left side went limp. The whole thing took maybe 1.5 seconds. Thren stumbled, his balance compromised by the sudden loss of function in 2 of his arms. He tried to pivot, bring his right arms into play, but Riley had already moved again. She dropped low, swept his forward leg, and used his own momentum to send him crashing to the floor. Before he could recover, she had one knee on his thorax, and her hand positioned at his throat in what was very clearly a killing position. Then she stood up, backed away and offered Thren a hand to help him rise. The hall was silent except for Thren's heavy breathing. He stared at Riley like she had just materialized out of empty space. "What?" Jack said from somewhere behind me, his voice strangled. "What was that?" Dravik moved to the center, gesturing for both cadets to stand at ease. "That was a human trained in their military combat systems from childhood. Cadet Kovacs. How long have you been studying hand-to-hand combat?" "Since I was 6 years old, sir," Riley answered, her breathing barely elevated. "My grandfather started teaching me the basics. Formal military training began at 14. 14. Cora's voice chimed with disbelief. "Your species allows children into military training." Riley's expression did not change. "Not officially. But military families teach their kids. Tradition. My grandfather said if I wanted to follow this path I needed to understand the cost, the commitment, the discipline." Dravik nodded slowly. "Human military culture is generational. It runs in bloodlines. They do not wait until adulthood to begin conditioning. By the time a human reaches academy age, they have often logged more practical combat hours than most species manage in their first 2 years of formal training." He turned to address all of us, his voice taking on a lecturing quality. "What you just witnessed was not random. Cadet Kovacs identified Thren's species-specific vulnerabilities in the first half-second of engagement. She exploited his reliance on upper limb dominance, targeted his neural structure with surgical precision, and ended the confrontation before Thren could bring his numerical advantage into play. That is not luck. That is training. Deep, comprehensive, brutal training." Thren had recovered enough function to speak. "She hit a nerve cluster I did not even know I had exposed." "Because you have never fought a human before," Dravik said bluntly. "Humans study. They analyze. They catalog weaknesses. Your species has been in the galactic community for 800 years. Humans have been here for 30. In that time they have compiled tactical databases on every known sapient species' physiology, psychology, and combat doctrine. They approach warfare like they approach everything else, with obsessive attention to detail and absolute refusal to accept limitations." He gestured back toward Riley. "Cadet Kovacs, how many species-specific combat profiles have you studied?" 47, sir. "All species currently represented in the Academy program." 47. She had studied 47 different species before even arriving at the Academy. I had studied 3. My own, and the 2 most common alliance partners. 3. "Peep," the small Quilix spoke up from the front row, her voice squeaking slightly. "But she is still human, still fragile. If Thren had landed a solid hit, would that not have ended it?" Riley turned to look at Pip, and for the first time I saw her smile, not the dismissive smile from earlier. This one had teeth. "Want to find out?" she asked, and the offer sounded completely genuine. Pip shrank back, whiskers flattening against her face. Dravik made a sound that might have been approval. "Humans build their combat doctrine around a simple reality. They are going to get hurt. Injuries are not a possibility. They are a certainty. So they train to fight through pain, through damage, through conditions that would incapacitate most species. They do not avoid getting hit. They accept it as part of the process and continue fighting anyway." He walked over to where Riley's jacket lay folded on the floor, picked it up with his smaller hands, and held it up for everyone to see. This jacket survived 14 months of continuous combat. The human wearing it survived the same. That should tell you everything you need to know about what happens when you underestimate Earth's warriors. He handed the jacket back to Riley, who took it with a nod of respect and shrugged it back on. The faded patches, the worn fabric, the history sewn into every thread. It did not look primitive anymore. It looked exactly like what it was, a warning. I glanced at Thren, who was still rubbing feeling back into his left arms. His expression was not anger or embarrassment. It was calculation. He was reassessing, just like I was, just like everyone in the hall was. Riley Kovacs was not here on charity. She was not a diversity pick. She was not filling a quota. She was here because she had earned it just like the rest of us, maybe more. Dravik dismissed us 20 minutes later. After running through standard academy protocols and logistical information that I barely registered, my mind was still replaying that demonstration. Watching Riley move with speed and precision that should not have been possible for someone from a species we had written off as inferior. We filed out of the orientation hall in subdued clusters, none of the earlier bravado remaining. Thren walked beside me, flexing his left arms repeatedly to work out the lingering numbness. I did not see her move, he admitted quietly, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I mean, I saw the initial position and then I was on the ground. Everything in between is just a blur. I saw it. Cora chimed from above us, her bioluminescence pulsing with agitated patterns. Barely. She moved like a Valine in combat mode, but she does not have our neurology. She should not be capable of that reaction speed. Jax caught up to us as we entered the corridor leading to the dormitory wings. The Draxan looked like someone had fundamentally reorganized his understanding of reality. Did you hear what Dravik said? 14 months. 800 soldiers against 40,000. Those numbers are insane. Those numbers are historical fact. Pip squeaked, scurrying alongside us on her short legs. I looked it up during dismissal. The Battle of Hadrian Station is required reading in advanced military tactics courses. They teach it as an example of impossible defensive actions. Humans held that station through 17 major assaults, 43 bombardments, and sustained siege conditions that killed 3 separate Vexar commanders who could not break them. I stopped walking. Why did we not know this? Why is this not common knowledge? Pip's whiskers twitched. Because humans do not talk about it much. They have so many conflicts like that in their history that Hadrian Station is just one entry in a very long list. For them it is Tuesday. For everyone else it is the kind of battle that gets studied for centuries. That hit me harder than I expected. The idea that Hadrian Station was not even particularly special by human standards. That their species had so many examples of impossible victories that this one barely registered as noteworthy in their own historical records. We continued walking in silence until we reached the dormitory common area. Riley was already there, sitting in one of the corner chairs with a datapad, reviewing what looked like academy course materials. She had the jacket draped over the back of her chair, those faded patches visible to anyone who walked past. No one was laughing now. No one was making jokes about primitive fashion or Deathworld or trauma responses. Thran hesitated, then walked over to her. I followed, partly out of curiosity, partly because I felt like I owed her something. An apology, maybe. Recognition, definitely. Riley looked up as we approached, her expression neutral and patient. Cadet Kovacs, Thran began, and I heard the formal respect in his tone. I wanted to say that you are a skilled fighter. That demonstration was enlightening. Riley's mouth quirked slightly. You telegraphed your first jab with your shoulder rotation. Fix that, and you will be much harder to read. Your species has a natural advantage with multiple limbs. Use it better. She said it without condescension, just straightforward tactical advice. Thran's antennae perked up, and he actually looked pleased by the criticism. I will work on that. Thank you. He paused, then gestured at the jacket. Your grandfather. He sounds like he was an exceptional soldier. He was, Riley said simply. He was also kind, patient, and believed everyone deserved a fair chance to prove themselves. She let that hang in the air for a moment before adding, he would have liked you all, once you got past the initial assumptions. That stung. But it was fair. We had judged her based on species stereotypes and outdated information. We had assumed weakness where there was strength, fragility where there was resilience. I found my voice finally. I am Vec. I think we owe you an apology. The things we said earlier, the mockery, it was ignorant and disrespectful. Riley studied me for a moment, then shrugged. You were not the first, and you will not be the last. Humans are used to being underestimated. Sometimes we even prefer it. Makes it easier when we need to exceed expectations. Cora drifted down to our level. That jacket truly has significant history. Dravik seemed deeply affected by it. It does, Riley confirmed. My grandfather always said that gear tells a story. Every patch, every stain, every repair. This jacket saw things most people could not imagine. It earned its scars. He wore it through hell and brought it home. Now I wear it to remember what he taught me. That courage is not about being fearless. It is about being terrified and doing the job anyway. Jax, who had been hanging back, finally stepped forward. When you offered to let Pip test your fragility, were you serious? Would you actually fight while knowing you would get hurt? Riley's smile returned. That one with teeth. Getting hurt is part of learning what you can endure. My grandfather used to say that pain is just information. It tells you where your limits are so you can figure out how to push past them. So yes, I was serious. I am always serious about training. I realized then what we were looking at. Riley was not just a cadet. She was the product of a military tradition that spanned generations, refined through countless conflicts, built on principles that prioritized effectiveness over comfort. She carried her grandfather's legacy not just in the jacket she wore but in every movement, every decision, every measured response. Dravik's final words from the orientation echoed in my mind. Respect all warriors regardless of origin. Judge them by their actions, not your assumptions. I had spent my entire life preparing for the academy, training, studying, pushing myself to be worthy of selection. I thought I understood what it meant to be a warrior. Riley had been raised by one, taught by someone who had held an impossible line against overwhelming odds, shaped by a culture that treated military service as a sacred duty passed down through families. We were not competing on equal ground. We were trying to catch up to a standard that humans had been refining for generations. The next 6 cycles were going to be brutal, challenging, possibly the hardest thing any of us had ever attempted, and I was going to be training alongside someone who had been preparing for this since she was 6 years old. Someone who carried the legacy of Hadrian Station on her shoulders like it was both an honor and a responsibility. Pete voiced what we were all thinking. This is going to be interesting. Riley looked at the small Quillix and nodded.
Yeah,
it really is. She went back to her datapad, and we dispersed to our assigned quarters. As I walked away, I glanced back one more time at that jacket draped over the chair. The patches caught the light, faded but still visible. Still meaningful, still a reminder that humans did not need natural advantages to be dangerous, they just needed a reason to fight. And the refusal to quit. I had a feeling we were all about to learn that lesson very thoroughly, and honestly I was looking forward to it.